and thank you for joining us today. We'll meet the 3 finalists for Police Chief of Cedar Falls. Candidates were solicited nationwide in February, and of the 5 applicants, these 3 met the listed requirements in the solicitation. The 3 finalists are now meeting for conversations with civic leaders, surrounding law enforcement leaders, community stakeholder groups, and senior city managers. After taking in feedback from each of these groups about the candidates, I'll send to the City Council a nomination for one of these finalists. The City Council will then consider approving my nomination in the weeks ahead, and we will continue to keep the community updated about the process. The COVID-19 pandemic has made this process a little more complex. I would have preferred to host an informal meet and greet session in the council chambers for you to connect with each of the finalists, but to avoid the spread of coronavirus, I'm instead recording this video series for you. I've invited the public to send in questions to me to ask each finalist on your behalf, and I'll ask these questions now. We're here with Captain Mark Howard today. I have a few questions for you, Captain Howard. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
First question I'll start off with is, how has your past experience helped prepare you for this position?
Well, my past experience goes back quite a few years. I actually started in management right after college when I moved to North Carolina. Well, I was actually in the Guard. I was a sergeant in the Guard. I actually, after my first 6 years, got out of the Guard, went to North Carolina, got into the textile industry, and was a department manager for a large company down in North Carolina. After coming back to Iowa, my goal was to be a police officer all along. I got frustrated with manufacturing. My wife did not want me to be a cop in Charlotte, so we moved back to Iowa. I got right back in the Guard as an E5, and then joined law enforcement. I started in Waverly. Even from the beginning of my career in law enforcement, I was a leader. I was an FTO after my first year with Waverly, a field training officer, and that continued on. And then special assignments I had through Waverly. As I came to Cedar Falls in 2007, kind of the same options. Right within my first year, I became a field training officer for the department, moved into investigations after getting the Officer of the Year award in 2008, and was a lead investigator for numerous investigations from 2009 to 2012 when I was promoted to lieutenant. And then worked all 3 shifts as a lieutenant for the department. Went to training as a training lieutenant where I was promoted to captain in 2017. From there, I've been the first shift commander and currently now the third shift commander as a captain. So just those experiences have all led me to, really where I'm at, and it's drove me to continue my education. Not only do I have a bachelor's degree in in political science, I went back and got my master's degree in public policy with my focus in criminal justice and city government. With the intentions of this is where I wanted to be. I wanted to have this opportunity, to lead our police department. So.
Okay, thank you. This question was suggested by TJ Frine. How would you seek to strengthen police and community engagement in Cedar Falls?
Well, I think, and this is not a criticism, but I think we need to work on our communication campaign as a department. I know we can't do much right now with COVID the way it is, but we need to open ourselves up when that's available. Let people see what we are. People see that we're still a functioning police department. We are still a very effective law enforcement agency, along with a fire agency. And there's a lot of miscommunication out there about the program we have going on. I think we need to open that up. Let people see who we are. We need to communicate it. And I don't think it should always be Director Olson doing that. We have several faces that can go before a camera, go before a committee, reach out to our neighborhood associations, reach out to our business associations, make ourselves present in all these places that we can, make ourselves available and really communicate who we are. That's how we build that relationship. I can tell you as a third shift commander, I have spent the last 2.5 years building relationships, not only with other law enforcement agencies, but also with the community. Our bar owners, after we started having a lot of problems in our bar districts, I reached out to our bar owners. I had a meeting, myself, Ron Gaines, and Director Olson had a meeting with the College Hill Partnership back in February 2019, where we had a shooting where 2 people were shot up there over on New Year's Eve that year. We reached out to them. We had probably 40 plus people show up. Great meeting. We made some guarantees to them, lighting, cameras, and several of the bar owners reached out to me. Mark, we've got to get a loitering ordinance. These are them asking us for a loitering ordinance, not us. Captain Herenstein and I in November wrote that ordinance, and I believe it's got one more reading yet before it becomes an ordinance for the council. So and the lighting, if you haven't seen it, I encourage people to get up there in the evenings, drive around the College Hill, see how much CFU has done. That whole Olive Street area really lit up nice now, which really helps us while we're patrolling. And then the cameras up there are phenomenal. The city has done an incredible job giving us some incredible technology, both on the Hill and downtown Main Street. So I think that's, really what community is about, is partnerships. So.
Okay, thank you. Next question comes from Kelly Stern, our library director. She asks, what's a significant challenge facing our community, and how will you use your influence as police chief to help facilitate solutions?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges we have, we're continually growing. And it's not always about population, but space, buildings, neighborhoods, which means more patrol area, more areas for us to be concerned about, especially, working the late hours where we're constantly watching these businesses, driving through these neighborhoods. So that's one of our concerns, is that the rapid growth, we have to make sure we keep up with that. I believe the new public safety building's a start because of its location. And then also the whole public safety model that was requested for us to do. I think that's a concern. We hear that a lot. We know that's a lot in the news. I know you talk about it in your council meetings. But the way I look at it is that's the political body that brought that to us. And everybody, I can tell you, we have great men and women down there that are doing everything they can to make that happen. And we need to make sure we're communicating that, continue working to show that this could be an effective program for this community. I think as an officer, I can tell you, we don't like being political. I've always said a chief of police should never be politically active. He or she should be politically aware, politically awake. But our job is to be representative of what the political body puts to us. The agenda that they set, it's our job to work very hard, very efficient, and make it as effective as a program as we can. And that's, I think, what we're trying to do. And what we have to do is continue to communicate that, as I already said, to our public, to show them that we have incredible people working for the Public Safety Department. Incredible people. They make us, people at the top, look good because of their efforts and how hard they work. And we just need to show that.
Okay. This position requires an understanding of goal setting and strategic planning. How would you incorporate strategic planning into your decision-making process as the police chief?
Well, I think everything we do for every year, we should be planning ahead. We get the agenda, again, from our, I'll get it from the public safety director. Our model's a little different than a lot of other cities. But then those objectives, we have to set goals for so we reach those goals. It's like when they came to me, Mayor, about the public safety department. I wasn't for it at first. I was absolutely against it. Matter of fact, one of my famous quotes that I get reminded of all the time is that, why would you wrap a dog in cat's fur? But once I was allowed to go on a couple different site visitations, and then was giving the objectives of the program. One, put more cops on the street. Well, when I hear that, I'm like, okay, now you got my attention. Get more firefighters to a fire scene, and then save money. And when I hear that, so those are objectives. So now we need to set goals every year, strategic goals of how we reach those elements, so we can show the public what we're doing is in their best interest. Nothing I plan to ever do as a police chief would be outside of the public's interest. I'm a police officer. I intend to be in charge of police officers, and everything that we do will be for the public and for the betterment of the public.
Okay, thank you. This question came from Truman Stone. In our professional lives, we've all experienced mistakes and failures. Can you give an example of a professional mistake or failure and what you learned from that experience?
Yeah, I shared this yesterday in an interview with some of our community leaders. I have always, one of the things I do all the time is I go to supervisory courses. I go to the LEADA courses. I receive my trilogy. It's hard to explain what that is, but really it's an FBI group that's taught. They teach a leadership, a command level, and an executive level course. They're a week long each. Once you've successfully passed all three of those, you get what's called a trilogy award. And I received mine in 2019. Well, one of the things I learned at the executive session, it was actually by Dr. Tony Batts, who was the chief of police in Baltimore when Freddie Gray died. One of the things he talked about was, if you don't get out in front of the media and you don't talk to the media when a major event happens, they're going to fill that void. So if you don't write the narrative, they're going to fill that narrative for you. And I learned that the hard way when we had our early New Year's Eve morning, 2019, when we had the shooting I spoke about on the Hill. I was the commander of the scene. I'd been out on that scene. I'm going to make an excuse here, but I was out on that scene all night, and I was really cold. And about 5 a.m, we're clearing that scene. One of my lieutenants and I and a few of the other officers that were there, and we're wrapping it up, getting our tape down. I saw one of the news agencies show up. I saw him set up, and I knew it was my responsibility to walk over to him and give a press release. And I was cold, I was hungry, and my strong addiction to coffee was killing me. And I convinced myself, I'm gonna go back to the PD and I'm gonna write a press release quick and get it off. Well, by the time I got to the PD and all the admin work we did, and later that, it was probably late that morning before I ever even kicked the press release out, he had done just that. He had put out a press release stating that that incident occurred in one of our bars. And of course it didn't. It occurred out in the street, had nothing to do with that establishment. And when we had our meeting in February with the bar owners, with the College Hill Partnership people, that bar owner was furious, and rightfully so. And I stood in front of every one of them people and I said, that was my fault. I saw him, I didn't take the steps all I needed to do was walk over to him and tell him exactly what happened, give him the press release in verbal form. And none of that would have occurred. So that was a hard lesson for me to learn. That was on me. And I took the time to make sure that bar owner knew that. And his complaint was valid. He had parents from UNI calling him saying, hey, my kid frequents your establishment. How does this happen in your establishment? Well, it didn't. It happened out on our streets, the streets that I'm responsible for. And I missed it. I should have gave that statement to the reporter that morning. So.
Okay. Also from T.J. Frine, he asks, how have you utilized the expertise of subordinates in areas where you're not an expert?
Well, I'll tell you, a good leader always puts people around him that know more than he does, or she does, excuse me. And I believe that to the core. I have 2 lieutenants who are incredible that work for me. It wasn't that long ago, we had a subject in a house with a rifle threatening his family. He was also threatening himself. It was not a situation, it was almost an active shooter situation where we had to enter. Well, one of my lieutenants is the MERT commander, the major incident, our SWAT commander. Well, in no way was I going to take command of that scene when I have that expert. So that subordinate, my lieutenant, I said, your scene, your call, what do you need? So he became our incident commander. He made the call. We went in that house. Fortunately, the only person that was hurt was the person with the gun due to his own doing. But that's how you have to use those experts around you. Some of our greatest experts are some of our newest people, and that's participation management. And that's the only way, there's always situations where you have to be an authoritarian. In a dynamic situation, a leader steps up, starts making calls. But in management itself or leadership itself, we want our people involved. And I was explaining that to the Teamster, our union, our officers yesterday, that listen, if it comes to how we want to set our cars up, well, we're not going to go to a captain and do it. I spend less time in a car than most of our officers. Why wouldn't we go to our officers and say, how do you want our cars set up? So those are examples of exactly how we use our subordinates for management type decisions and using that participative or democratic form of management.
Okay. A question from Nicholas Rosauer. He asks, what should the role of law enforcement be in addressing our current mental health epidemic?
Well, we're on the front line of the mental health epidemic, and we need training. And everybody knows that. I hear Sheriff Thompson speak on this all the time. I'm in his corner. We have Tom Ikas come and speak to us quite a bit from Unity Point Mental Health. He does some of our mental health training. He has told me personally that he has been to the State House several times trying to get help. I was rated really low when it comes to mental health and what we do about it. And the less facilities we have, the less help we have, the more law enforcement's on the front line. So law enforcement has become the tool, once again, dealing with an epidemic, and it's mental health. And I made the comment, we had an incident a few years ago where one of our officers was hurt pretty bad early in the morning by somebody with mental illness. And I made the comment, and it was actually to Tom, that we have officers, they're either going to jail or they're going to hospitals because of this, because nobody wants to shoot an unarmed person with a mental illness. Nobody wants to, but and our tools end up being, as Sheriff Thompson has spoke out about, is jail. Because there are no beds. We need as a country to I believe anyways, this is kind of a political statement, to start putting mental health back to the forefront. We need to start, it's frustrating when you hear about, we don't facilitate anymore, all we want to do is medicate. We had a young lady, and I don't want to sell too many details because these are local people, but we had a young lady we were dealing with a lot up toward the hill. She lived in a private apartment. One night we went in, we were there probably, I'm going to say 5 nights a week. I was a second shift lieutenant at the time. And she went for a knife. She was upset with her mother for calling us. She went for a knife off the knife block. I intercepted her. We went down. I ended up cracking my elbow. Ended up in a sling for a while. I remember when we were taking her to the ambulance. We got her. Nobody was hurt except me. We got her to the ambulance, and I remember asking the mom, what, can't she live at home, or can't we get her in a facility? And the mom's response just broke my heart. Hey, we had her in a facility, but she's done there now. And if she lives at home, the medication is, and I don't remember what the number was, $30,000 or something crazy a year. But if she can live in her own apartment and show independent living, then the state will help her with her medication. Well, that's just heartbreaking. So here, mom was going over 3 times a day to make sure she wasn't drinking, make sure she was taking her medication, make sure, and it was just really tragic. That's what we see. We're on the front line. And that's every agency. I don't care what city you work in, we are on the front line. We're seeing, just more and more and more as we have less and less places to take these people to. It ends up going over into Sheriff Thompson's jail sometimes because we have no other alternative. So it's very frustrating.
Well, as a follow-up to that from Mr. Rosehauer, he asks, how much mental health crisis training should Cedar Falls police officers receive to effectively respond to mental health-related calls and incidents?
We do it every year. We have mental health training every year. It's probably not enough. I know Sheriff Thompson is, I haven't spoke to him about this, but I was told that he received a grant, going to be starting a CIT team, which is a crisis intervention team, actually trained to intervene with people with mental illnesses. And have a team that can come out now or be called out when we, so I think law enforcement's doing something. Right now, it's just the resources aren't there. I would rather see cops trained in mental health intervention than to continue doing what we're doing. Like I said, I don't want to see cops going to jail, and I don't want to see cops in hospitals. But we're on the front line. And it's frustrating, and it can be scary sometimes by the last second choices we have to make while intervening and with some of these people who really just need help.
Okay. Additional question: if you've or in the point where you've disagreed with a superior, how did you resolve this disagreement?
Well, anytime I disagree with a superior or a subordinate, I do it in private. It needs to be done in private, needs to be done. And with a superior, it's got to be done respectful. Director Olson, when he was Chief Olson, I disagreed with several things that, like I said in the beginning of the public safety program, I was adamantly against it. But I conducted myself professionally. We had private conversations. I wanted to know more about it. If you want me to be this, tell me about it. And he took the time to do so. Matter of fact, he invited me to go to Woodbury, Minnesota. He invited me to go to Kalamazoo. And I took those opportunities to go learn about what it is that they were asking us to do. I think that's the best way to do it. Don't just jump to conclusions. Go ask a little bit more about what they're asking you to do. I may disagree with your policy, but if you explain it to me, you may get me on board. But also, I'd like the opportunity to explain why I disagree with it. And that's why I think having that private conversation is always the best way. Besides that, it can be very uncomfortable if you jump on somebody or, in a public manner. Mm-hmm. It's always good to take that. So I like to do that in private and give the opportunity to have something explained to me and then maybe decide a little bit better whether I continue to disagree or it's something I can get on board with.
Okay. Following up, another question from TJ Frine was, how do you see this police chief role differently than it's carried out in other cities, since you'll be working for a public safety director and not a city manager or mayor?
Right. So our structure is a little different. So we have a public safety director that myself or whoever the police chief will be and the fire chief are responsive to. But I think you're still head. I will still be, if I was chosen for this job, still be the head of the police side. And like I said, a good leader chooses people around them that maybe always don't just agree with them. The worst thing we can do is have a yes person work for us because we're not always right. And if we have people working for us that are afraid to challenge us, we find ourselves going down the wrong path a lot of the times. So I hope that as the police chief, if there's something I disagree with, I will have the ability to challenge that in the manner we just talked about, in a private manner, in a manner that hopefully Director Olson and I can come to an agreement in some way if it's something I disagree with. I think you have to manage that way. My responsibility will be to the wellness of my officers. And wellness doesn't always mean their physical wellness, but do they have the right equipment? Are they getting the right care? Are they working the right amount of hours? All the things that we have to look to, and I think that's the chief of police's responsibility, no matter where he or she works, no matter what structure that is. Ours is a little different because we have that intermediate or that medium person before we get to use or to the city manager, where where a lot of cities they're directly responsive to the city manager or the mayor, him or herself. So we do have that different, maybe almost like an assistant chief position, as we call it, the assistant public director position. But I look at it this way: we've got a chief of fire, we'll have a chief of police, and those two entities or those two divisions should be led by those two people and directed by that public safety director. And that triangle should be able to make decisions. And when it comes to decisions on personnel, wellness, and equipment on the fire side, that should be made by Chief Bostwick. When it comes to stuff being chose by the police side, wellness, equipment, that information should come directly from the chief of police. He or she's the one that's going to have that knowledge, the hands-on, and have direct communication with those officers to have that knowledge of what's needed. So it's just a little bit different structure, but that's how I presume it will go.
All right, thank you. So the last question I have here on the sheet is from Kelly Stern. To whom is the police chief most accountable and why?
The police chief is accountable mostly to two groups. Number one, no matter if you're a police chief or a police officer, you're accountable to the citizens you work for. Police chiefs, and this goes into what I said earlier about police chiefs, and I've been told this by Dr. Tony Batts. I've been told this by every executive leader I've ever had training from. They should never be politically active. Police chiefs should always be politically aware, right? Politically awake of the atmosphere around them, have contingency plans in place to make changes that come from that political body as easy and as smooth and as effective as it can be for the public. Because that's who we work for. No matter if you're a police officer or a police chief, it is the public that we serve. We are public servants. I'm a professor at UNI, and when I teach at UNI, an adjunct teacher at UNI, and when I teach, I'm fortunate. I'm a police officer that gets to teach wannabe police officers, so I can tell all these crazy stories, and I'm a hero to them. But I'm fortunate. One of the first things I ask them at the beginning of a class is, "Why do you want to be a police officer?" And I'm telling you, to a man or woman, they all say the same thing: "I want to help people." It's never, "Oh, I want a pretty badge," or "Oh, I want to drive fast," or "Oh," it's always, "I want to help people." And I love that because that's who we want serving as policemen and women on our streets. And it's true because really, who do they work for? Yeah, they work for a city or a municipality or a county or a state, but really they work for the public. So the people we serve is who we work for. And then a chief of police also works for his or her subordinates. The number one job, I think, of a leader is to prepare those under them to take over. We should constantly be teaching and granting authority and responsibility to those we feel one day will take our position, because that's one of our biggest responsibilities. And then, as I said earlier, the wellness of our officers is one of our biggest responsibilities. Do they have the right equipment? Do they have the ability to seek employment assistance programs that we have? Are they aware of these programs? Do they have the right, are their vests being rotated out when they're expired? All these things that cops worry about all the time. What's their hours? Are they working too many hours? We've had issues in that with signups where we had officers simply working too many weekends in a row. And I remember some of the comments on social media where it was, and we were using Blackhawk County deputies as signups simply because it got to a point where my people that work night shift, they work the weekends, but when they finally get a weekend off, their wife and kids or their husband and kids deserve their time. And it's not fair to ask them to sign up on their weekends off. And it was getting to a point where we simply weren't getting enough people to help work, some of the bar districts we have to use our signups. And some of the comments were, we need help from other people. No, what that is our concern for our people, looking out for their wellness, that they're working too many hours. It's very stressful to be out on foot, in these crowded bars, in these, walking, checking IDs, doing the things that these people do, especially when we know at times there's been armed subjects in those areas, which is why we have those officers there. So that is who we work for. We work for our citizens, but we also, chiefs of police, need to work for our subordinates. and make sure that we're doing everything for them that we can. Of course, in the management lineup, I will work directly under a public safety director. That's true. But a chief of police's job, his or her job really is the wellness of their officers and to make sure that we're serving our public the way we're supposed to.
Okay, thank you. We have a few extra minutes, so I get to ask you a bonus question.
You bet.
What has been either your favorite or most rewarding experience in law enforcement so far?
Oh, gosh, I got two of them. So when I was in the city of Waverly, I used to consider myself Batman, and I was really elaborate about it. So our shirts have a zipper; they don't have buttons. And under mine, I went ahead and made the old Batman symbol on my vest with the yellow and the black bat. And I was the youngest officer there at the time, so I was always selected to go read to the kindergartners, which I loved. I always tell everybody I have 1,000 kids, I have 5 kids, but so I loved it anyways. And one time when I was there, I had a keychain. I had a Batman keychain. I used to hang on my car keys for work. And the one kid goes, "Hey, he's got a Batman keychain." And I looked around, and I think this teacher didn't know what I was going to do. And I'm like, "Really? I'm going to show you guys something, but you can't ever tell anybody." And I opened that shirt up and pulled that up, and the eyes were, "It's really him. It's really Batman." One of the best moments of my life was when these kids actually thought I was Batman. Really, I will never forget that. And that was probably in my second year in law enforcement, back in probably 1998. So, and then with the city of Cedar Falls, I was an investigator from 2009 through 2012. And I worked in some incredible cases, and one of my proudest cases was the bank robberies that were happening all over the Cedar Valley. And I came in after several of those had already happened. My captain at the time ended up putting me in charge of that, and my lieutenant and I ended up working with the FBI, Cedar Rapids, Waterloo PD, Iowa City PD, several PDs, and we built a task force where we would meet every month down at the Cedar Rapids FBI office working that. The night Jay Harkless was caught, my lieutenant and I were called to actually come down there and do the interviewing. And what an honor that was to have these agencies looking to our agency to do the interviewing, and myself and a couple other, an Iowa City officer and an FBI agent actually interviewed him for numerous hours on 2 different occasions to get those bank robberies solved that were happening all over eastern Iowa. Just a real proud moment that I love to share. Even when I'm teaching class, I use that. We talk quite a bit about that. But it's a moment where I really am proud of my law enforcement career. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time and coming in today and sharing these experiences with the residents of Cedar Falls. Appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity.
We're here now with Assistant Chief Craig Berte. We have a few questions for you as well. I'd like to ask first, how has your past experience prepared you for this critical leadership position?
All right. Well, I'll give you a little background on my experience at the Cedar Falls Police Department. I was hired at the Cedar Falls Police in 1991. I've served there. I got promoted to sergeant in 2001. I've been a lieutenant. I've been a captain. I've served as the assistant chief for the last 4 years. I've had a lot of experiences in the investigative unit and in patrol. Probably the most specific for the police chief position would be my last 4 years as assistant police chief. So I worked with the budget. I assisted the chief of police really on all matters at the police department. So the one duty that has prepared me the most would be my last 4 years as assistant chief. But all my other supervisory positions, as a captain, I supervise first, second, and third shift, also the investigative unit. I served as an investigator in the late 90s. So all those positions have prepared me to be the police chief.
Okay. I had a question in from TJ Frine. He asked, how would you seek to strengthen police and community engagement in Cedar Falls?
All right. Well, one thing, we do a fairly good job at that now. Some places that we can improve would be trying to do, anything we get out in the community. The more trails patrols we can do with our gator or on bikes. We do some joint bike patrols with the UNI Police Department. Trying to do more of those. Anything along those lines helps. Foot patrols on our downtown, foot patrols on College Hill. We do a lot of foot patrols in the evening when College Hill is active. But anything we can do to get out in the community, I'm definitely a fan of that. So we want to do those things. So those would be some of the ideas I can think of right away to get out in the community.
Okay. This question was suggested by Kelly Stern. What's a significant challenge facing our community, and how will you use your influence as police chief to facilitate solutions?
Well, I would say one challenge that I can think of is we live in an extremely safe community, but we do have, we have an area near the college where we have a lot of alcohol-related activity in the late hours. So one thing we've done and will continue to do is, mass our forces when we need them in those evening hours. We've hired some extra foot patrols up there. We've made great investments in cameras for the downtown and the College Hill area. We direct our officers to be very vigilant in those areas. So we want the Cedar Falls Police Department to be a deterrent to criminal activity. And like I said, we have an extremely safe community, but that is a concern of ours that we keep an eye on and just try and make sure we don't have problems up in that area that reflect poorly on the community or put anybody at risk.
Okay. This position requires an understanding of goal setting and strategic planning. How would you incorporate strategic planning into your decision-making process as the police chief?
Could you ask that again?
Sure. It says, this position requires an understanding of goal setting and strategic planning. How would you incorporate strategic planning into your decision-making process as police chief?
All right. Well, I've been involved in some of that for the last few years as the assistant chief. We take input from our supervisory staff and our command staff, work with the director of public safety and with the fire chief on, setting our goals for the future. Some of those goals will also tie into, they cost money, so it ties into possibly, the CIP process for the city or for future budgeting. So I've been involved in that before, and really it comes down to is, looking ahead, making those plans. If there's a cost to it, setting it up so it's either in the budget or it's purchased through CIP, and then executing those plans in the future.
Okay, thank you. A question suggested by Truman Stone was, in our professional lives, we've all experienced mistakes and failures. Can you give an example of a professional mistake or failure and what you learned from that experience?
Well, I've definitely made mistakes through the years. I've been on the police department for 30 years. Could you ask the question again?
Sure. In our professional lives, we've all experienced mistakes and failures. Can you give an example of a professional mistake or failure and what you learned from that experience?
Okay. Well, I can think of, one recently is, when you work with budgets and kind of like you got into before, you have to forecast things and make your best guess. And so sometimes as you're planning the budget, those things aren't actually executed for 12 or 18 months later. So we've had times where I was involved in planning things or planning purchases that then later on when it gets down to it, the money's getting tight and we've had to make, money adjustments or pull from one fund and cover it. So that's definitely a recent example I can think of. And really the lesson learned is to, be better in planning in the future and know what your expected costs are going to be. So that's just one that I can think of.
Okay. How have you utilized the experience of subordinates in areas where you're not an expert?
Well, on the police department, we have really from our rank of, we have captains, we have lieutenants, we have patrol officers. They all have different specialties. And so, we really, on a lot of our tasks, we go to who that specialist is. For example, we have a lieutenant who oversees our field training officer program. We have a captain who supervises our SWAT team in conjunction with a lieutenant. Our firearms instructors are lieutenants and officers who are in charge of our firearms program. I could go on and on about specialties within the police department that are overseen by, either officers, lieutenants, or captains. Another example I can think of is our honor guard for the police is a lieutenant is in charge of that. We have a group of CPR people who teach CPR. There's a lieutenant in charge of that. So all across our department, people are subject matter experts. And so I use those subordinates, rely on the information that they give me as assistant chief or chief. And so that's how we've always operated.
Okay. A question in from Nicholas Rosauer was, what should the role of law enforcement be in addressing our current mental health epidemic?
Well, law enforcement has a big hand in it, and that has definitely been on the forefront, most recently in the last few years. One thing earlier in one of my interviews today, I attended a crisis intervention training back in 1997. And for our area, it was kind of the inaugural crisis intervention training dealing with mental health for law enforcement. Since that time, there's been all kinds of iterations of that in law enforcement. And so currently, throughout 2020 and into 2021, one of the goals here in the county really is to get as many law enforcement officers in Blackhawk County to crisis intervention training. It's a 3-day training. And we're working with the Sheriff's Department, Waterloo Police Department, all the departments in the county, and Department of Corrections Services on accomplishing that and doing it through a train-the-trainer process where we would get a certain amount of people, export them out, get them trained, bring them back. And the goal would be to train every law enforcement officer in Blackhawk County, but immediately just to start training as many as we can. So the mental health calls are increasing. They're increasing in severity. I understand that, and so we are addressing that and working on that. So regardless of this chief process, that's something we've been working on. So
Okay. As a follow-up, you answered this a little bit already, is also from Nicholas Rosauer. How much mental health crisis training should Cedar Falls police officers receive to effectively respond to these kinds of calls and incidents?
well, I would say the first, we've had some short trainings, a few hours here, a few hours there, or 1-day training. But our goal here real shortly is that all of our officers would get 3 days worth of training, or as many as possible in Blackhawk County, and then build on that. Some of them, the trainers would have 1 week of training. And then there's also obviously the tie-in with the hospital and the paramedics. So we've been dealing with this topic. The sheriff and the other police chiefs are dealing with it. So it is something where we will be doing more training on it.
Okay. This question was suggested by T.J. Frine. When you have disagreed with a superior, how did you resolve this disagreement?
Well, throughout anybody's career, that definitely happens. I would say if I disagree with a superior, usually I, take a little time, build my case on why I disagree or what I think the problem is. And then I think the most important thing is communication. Go talk to that person, explain your side of it or your point of view, and hopefully you come to some compromise. Even if I do agree and I've explained it and done everything, I like to use the saying that, I'm a good soldier and I'll move out and do what I'm told to do. But I think the biggest thing is just communication, that you're trying to convey why you don't agree or a different point of view. And I would say most times it seems like you end up with a solution somewhere in the middle.
Okay. And back into that question, I apologize. The way I had asked it was when you have disagreed with the superior. It was asked to me as when have you disagreed with the superior, just as an example, just to keep it fair among the candidates.
Okay. Well, I would say through my, police, I was in the military active duty and into the Guard and Reserve for 26 years. So I can think of several times where I disagreed with a point of view. I definitely have in the police department over 30 years. I don't know if I can think of a specific example, but I would say in the police department, it probably the more typical one might not be disagreeing with a supervisor, but we always would have captains meetings, and I was a captain since 2004. And the captains are all very senior in the police department, and we sit around a conference table, and I would say the majority of the time we do not agree when we come into meetings. And we have great discussions. Everybody has a lot of candor. And it doesn't matter if you're the chief or the assistant chief or the captain or even a lieutenant in the room. We have great discussions, and we come to a resolution. Sometimes it's by the democratic process too. We actually physically vote, and everybody respects it when we leave the room. I would say even right now in our labor management committee in public safety, which is made up of employees from police and fire and management, that's a very democratic process there too, and great discussions. And we touch on a lot of very delicate topics. And so you've got everybody from the director of public safety down to firefighters and police. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's very common that we don't agree, but we find common ground in the end. It may not always be with a supervisor, like the question asked.
Okay, thank you. How do you see this police chief role differently than in other cities, since you'll be working for a public safety director and not a city manager or mayor?
All right. Well, our police chief role in Cedar Falls is a little different, and it's been that way for a long time. We had public safety back in the 80s, and you had a fire chief and a police chief that answered to the director of public safety. So, it's just different. I wouldn't say it's better or worse. Most police chiefs, just like you said, are answering to a city manager or a mayor. I would say probably one advantage is if you are answering to a director of public safety, there's probably more consistency than if you're answering to an elected mayor. You might have a little less consistency with turnover or elections. But really, I've been a police supervisor for a long time. You're always going to answer to somebody. And so the police chief in Cedar Falls just answers to the director of public safety. So I don't think it's better or worse, or it's just different.
Okay.
Probably one advantage would be is that you also can collaborate a little more. And in my case, or the case of anybody getting this job, is the director of public safety is our former police chief. So in terms of perspectives and getting advice, that's obviously a great asset to have right there.
All right. The last official question I have for the candidates is also suggested by Kelly Stern. To whom is the police chief most accountable and why?
Well, that's actually a really good question, because I view it as you're the community's police chief. So really, you answer to the community, but at the same time, you're also the leader of the organization. So in terms of enforcing policy and enforcing standard and, setting the rules and regulations, you've got that piece of it. But really, that police chief, similar to the mayor's role, you answer to the citizens, really from morning till night. Even as the assistant police chief, if I'm out in public and somebody knows my role, you always hear their concerns. And if it's something you can take back and affect, we always do that. So I see police chief definitely as twofold, that you answer to the community, but you're also in charge of all the employees of the police division, and that's a significant role.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and that fills out my formal question, so I get to ask a bonus one for you.
All right.
What's been your favorite or most rewarding experience in law enforcement so far?
Well, I would say, and that's actually pretty easy for me, my most rewarding probably is I've worked here for 30 years, or just about 30 years, and I grew up on a farm in north central Iowa, so I didn't have any connections to Cedar Falls. But I would say one of the most rewarding things for me is to be doing law enforcement and maybe working on College Hill or working on Community Main Street, and people view you as their police department. This is our police department. They're here to, protect the citizens of Cedar Falls. It seems like if you work an event at either of those places, there's just great conversation. Everybody's happy to see you. And so that's just always a very inviting and good feeling if you're going out and working somewhere. So downtown, especially lately, if you work a daytime event or if you're working at Sturgis Falls or something, it's very rewarding. It's very pleasant. It's very enjoyable. I always joke around, like if I work Sturgis Falls, I'd do the same thing if I was working or if I was off duty. It's just interacting with people and, seeing what's going on. So I would say that's the most rewarding work around here.
Okay. And with a few minutes remaining, I can ask too, is there any question you wish I had asked you?
No, I probably, when I gave my history at the beginning, the question was about what's prepared me. One other thing about me that I think has helped me in terms of leadership and team building is I did serve in the Army, or the Army National Guard, for almost 27 years. So I served from 86 to 2012. I went to Afghanistan for a year in 2010. I was awarded a Bronze Star Medal. I'm very proud of my military service. I'm also extremely happy to be retired from it. But in my latter years as a sergeant major, there was a lot of work, a lot of team building. And so I think some of those experiences definitely helped me anytime in any organization. So I didn't cover that in my bio. So.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming in.
All right. Thank you, Bear.
Look forward to more conversation soon.
All right.
Thank you very much for joining us today. We look forward to talking with you and learning a little bit more about you today.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate that.
Certainly. So I'll go right into the questions here. How has your past experience prepared you for this critical leadership role?
So I've been very fortunate in my career to have experienced a lot of things, particularly in police work in general. When you talk about high critical incidents, whether it be shootings, or any type of other major incident, presidential visits, things like that. In addition to just community engagement, I've been very fortunate coming from a city where those experiences are many and plentiful, some good, some bad, and obviously those bad ones you learn from and grow from. And fast forward to today, where I take on more of a even more responsibility. It's really prepared me, to liaison with city officials and other government officials. So that really, for me, is what makes me say, you know what, police chief, I think I want to do that. I know I can do it, and I'm prepared to do it.
Okay. This question was suggested by Cindy Bozen. How would you seek to strengthen police and community engagement in Cedar Falls?
Oh, that's a great question. So I am huge on collaboration with the community. And what I mean by that is I don't believe that we as a police department or any police department anywhere should just shove down police services to the community and say, here's what you're going to get, take it or leave it. I believe in it is continually updating and messaging and communicating with the community and getting their input and their buy-in and how they want their police department run. So it would be consistency and just doing things that I know work.
Okay, thank you. Question suggested by our library director, Kelly Stern. She asks, what's a significant challenge facing our community, and how will you use your influence as police chief to facilitate solutions?
I hate to say, because Cedar Falls has done a great job in keeping the community safe, but like any community, there are issues that arise. And I think one of the challenges for Cedar Falls is the College Hill area. And what I mean by that is, unfortunately, there have been some folk that, don't live in the city, but come to the city and commit nefarious acts. And how do we address those acts and properly address those acts? And to do so, we really need to work with our other external community partners, our stakeholders, and kind of look at that, in my opinion, as a holistic approach of all type of alternatives. Because with any issue in the community, we're not going to arrest our way out of it. We have to have buy-in and collaboration between community members, business owners, county officials, other city officials. So as I look at it, off the top of my head, College Hill would be one of the things I would say would be a challenge in addressing some of the violence that has occurred there as of recent, and trying to mitigate that.
Okay. This position requires an understanding of goal setting and strategic planning. How would you incorporate strategic planning into your decision-making process as police chief?
Absolutely. So my decisions should be guided around, number one, community goals and objectives, and also making sure that it's ethically and morally sound and legally sound. So all my strategic planning, which I hope to do a 2 to 5 year strategic plan and vision, will be around the objectives set by council and the community as a whole, and making sure we set benchmarks to achieve those objectives.
Okay, thank you. A question suggested by Truman Stone was, in our professional lives, we've all experienced mistakes and failures. Can you give an example of a professional mistake or failure and what you learned from that experience?
Absolutely. Professional mistake. I think about in supervision, and in my time as a manager, one of the mistakes I made was being too close to personnel. And what I mean by that is I was asked to be a change agent, to really engage with staff, and that's my leadership style, is to really engage. But as a manager, sometimes you can't be the joking manager, if you will, with subordinates, and then understanding your crowd and your audience. So for me, it's been really knowing who I'm talking to and understanding where they're at in life, and engaging and addressing and toning my tenor to them as a whole. But again, that's depending on the crowd and things like that. So for me, I learned that, hey, you got to really understand your audience, and speak appropriately and accordingly to that audience. It was a learning experience that I have learned from and grown from.
Another question, actually, I'll move forward to how have you utilized the expertise of subordinates in areas where you're not an expert?
Absolutely. I always tell my staff, we can't be great at everything, so pick one or two things and be great at those. And that's what I do. There are some things that I'm just not great at, and I want to, number one, mentor and really help flower those employees that have those expertises that I may not have, because I can't be the best at everything. And I need to rely upon and trust my staff that they're going to help me out and succeed and help the organization out and succeed. So it's really just trusting my staff, knowing them personally, not just as from a chief or a captain or lieutenant or what have you, but knowing them and their goals and mentoring them and helping shaping them so that can be the best that they can be. And then ultimately it promotes and helps grow the organization.
Okay. This question was suggested by Nicholas Rosauer. He asks, what should the role of law enforcement be in addressing our current mental health epidemic?
That's a tough one. And when I say that, because there are a lot of instances that society has called police or expected police to be the fixer of all problems. Mm-hmm. Mental health is not necessarily a police problem. And what I mean by that is we should be facilitators of helping them get the assistance they need, and not as the authoritative body, if you will, to come and say, no, we're going to arrest you for some unknown reason or whatever reason it may be. Obviously there are some times where an arrest, we have no choice, but if the root cause is the mental health, we're not doing anyone any good by just arresting them and putting them in jail. We really have to work with our external partners, community health, other resources within the community, homeless shelters, or whatever it may be, to kind of help address the root cause and go from there. I just don't believe that police should be the primary solution to mental health.
Mm-hmm. So this follows on to the last question, also suggested by Nicholas Rosauer. How much mental health crisis training should Cedar Falls police officers receive to effectively respond to mental health related calls and incidents?
So I envision, I personally am a certified CIT, which is Crisis Intervention Technician, or Crisis Intervention Team member. I would like to see at minimum 40 hours of CIT training for all officers, and then ongoing updated training as time goes on. Because what I would ultimately like to see is that police officers, again, it would be a co-response between police and some type of mental health professional to incidents where we're involved.
A question suggested by TJ Frine was, when you've disagreed with a superior, when have you disagreed with a superior, and how did you resolve this disagreement?
I'm very communicative. I love interacting and talking with people, and if there's a disagreement, we have to sit down and talk it out. We may not get up from the table agreeing, but we need to sit down, discuss our differences, our thought processes, and why we came to that conclusion. And at the end of the day, it's what's best for the organization. We have to continue doing our jobs and doing it well. So at the end of the day, it has to be a conclusion that we continue our mission.
Okay. Can you provide an example?
Yes. So I personally had a supervisor where I felt as the supervisor did not have faith in my skills and abilities as a first-line supervisor. So what I did with that, my supervisor at the time was I pulled him or her aside. It was a him, I just say him, and spoke with them very honestly and genuinely, and how I felt. Because oftentimes, if we don't speak, how does that supervisor know he could have known he didn't, he wasn't doing that or didn't see that happening. But I let him know how I felt and why I felt that way, mm-hmm. and what it seemed to me, and we kind of discussed that out and worked through it.
Okay. Another question suggested by Mr. Frine was, how do you see this police chief role differently than in other cities, since you'll be working for a public safety director rather than for a city administrator or a mayor?
I don't see any difference, and here's why. We all ultimately have someone we answer to. And for me, as a police chief here, it would be a collaboration between myself and the public safety director. And it's nice that the public safety director has experience in police and fire. So I don't see any difference in that You know, at the end of the day, we have a superior to answer to. It's just in this exception, the superior has a background and experience and knowledge of what's going on and what dealings was occurring within the department.
Okay. And the last question I have that's a written question is, to whom is the police chief most accountable and why?
Most accountable? That's a great question.
Also from our library director, Kelly Stern.
I would say most accountable to the citizens of the community. Granted, he or she is accountable to their direct superior, in this instance, director, or in some other instances, the mayor or council. But I think ultimately the citizens, because they are relying upon him or her to guide and manage their safety, right? Whether that be fire, police, or ambulance, or what have you. So, you know, although administratively it's important to be responsible to the mayor or council, but ultimately I do believe the citizens had that say-so and should have some say-so in how or who or how you're responsible to them.
Okay. So that's the end of my formal questions. With a little bit of extra time left, I always like to ask, what's been your favorite or most rewarding experience so far as a law enforcement officer?
You know, I've been very fortunate to do a lot of things in police work, and all the things you kind of see on TV, although they may not be exactly how they are in real life, but those things I've done, you know, car chases and chasing suspects and retrieving guns, illegal guns off the street. But for me, the most rewarding thing has been when I was able to, and I shouldn't say I, because it was a collaborative effort between me, the officers I supervised, and the residents in this particular neighborhood, where we actually improved the quality of life for an entire street. This street had some issues with drug dealing, open-air drug dealing, gun violence from shootings occurring, and then just general nuisance quality of life issues like loud parties late at night, fights in the middle of the street. And being able to collaborate with those residents in that area, in that street, and actually see the change over a course of several months of quality of life, that was by far the best and more rewarding and fulfilling than any time I've got a gun off the street, to be honest with you. Actually being able to affect someone's life, especially their personal quality of life, you know. It's one thing to go somewhere at work or visit somewhere and have an unenjoyable experience because we can come home to our sanctuary, if you will. But it's another thing when your sanctuary is under attack, under siege, and to be able to change that around for those residents, that was the best.
Excellent. So I'll ask now, are there any questions you wished I had asked, or is there anything you'd like to add?
You know, I'll add that one of the reasons I want to come to Cedar Falls, it is very similar to the area I lived in the state of Michigan. And I miss this atmosphere of traditional policing. I miss the public safety model. And Cedar Falls, one thing that I've noticed in my research is people come here and stay. People either come here and stay, or they leave and immediately come back after, you know, they're done doing what they're doing, or they're born here and never leave. And what I've seen is people take an active investment in the city, and I like that. And because that shows me that people care about the city. People want to see the city grow and prosper. And not all cities have that active participation or that desire or that willingness from the citizens to actually be active participants in the growth and the prosperity and seeing that their city does well. So that excites me. That really does excite me.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming in to interview with us, Lieutenant Turner, and look forward to being able to talk a little bit more with you later on.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks again for being part of these conversations. If you have feedback or additional questions regarding our police chief candidates, you can reach me by email at rob.green@cedarfalls.com, or you can email your council members at citycouncil@cedarfalls.com. You can also see more details about the candidates at www.cedarfalls.com/CF Police Chief.